What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I'm going to be taking all of these parts behind me and building them into an $800 gaming PC build for 2019 that's going to redefine the price to performance ratios at 1080p and 1440p gaming, and I'm going to be showing you that firsthand with some live gaming benchmarks later on in today's video. But first, let's run through the parts I selected and put this system together. Bookmark is an easy free website builder with a host of features, including e-commerce for making an online store. The coolest bit, it uses artificial intelligence, answers 7 simple questions, and it creates the website in front of your eyes in less than 2 minutes for you to easily tweak and perfect. It's super cool, and you can create your fully responsive site today at bookmark.com, linked in the description below. Now, what makes this build really exciting for me is the number of brand new components that go into it. That means you're on the cutting edge of tech, as cliche as it sounds, and means this system isn't going to be out of date in a couple of months' time, which is always a bonus. The first of those brand new parts is actually the case, and this is Cooler Master's NR400. I'll link it alongside all the other components in the description below. Now, this case doesn't look particularly exciting to begin with, but ticks all the necessary boxes. A proper tempered glass panel, none of this acrylic crap that scratches super easily, USB 3 on the front panel, a power supply shield to keep your system nice and aesthetically pleasing, room for 2 hard drives and a few SSDs, so storage is nicely covered, and a full front mesh panel that means your system is going to be super duper quiet, it's going to be super cool, it isn't going to thermal throttle, which are all big bonuses. Moving on to the inside of the chassis, and we've once again got some really exciting components. For the CPU, for the brain of the system, as bad of an analogy as that is, I selected the AMD Ryzen 5 2600 with a base clock of 3.4 GHz, a boost of 3.9, 6 cores and 12 threads. It's got single threaded and multi-threaded performance on lock. It's also overclockable and is a really good chip if you want to get a bit more free performance out of it. Finally, the 65 watt low TDP means it runs super cool and isn't going to output a load of heat, which combined with the great airflow on this case, and we are on to a winner. One advantage that this CPU also has, and all AMD chips really at the uber budget end, is fantastic included stock CPU coolers. Whilst this is going to stop your CPU on the most part from thermal throttling, it isn't going to give it the best treatment, shall we say, and for that I selected the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition. A mouthful as much as it is, this builds on the success of Cooler Master's original and frankly legendary Hyper 212 Evo, with a nickel plated design on the CPU block and the copper pipes and that fin array. You've got a 120mm RGB fan, which keeps things cool and keeps things looking pretty. All in all, the main benefit of this CPU cooler is going to be the overclocking headroom it affords. You can get the chip up to 4.3, 4.4 GHz, no problem in the motherboard BIOS, and it's also going to keep the system quiet, which is one of the biggest complaints people have when they first build their, their gaming PC. The stock coolers aren't the quietest in the world, and you can definitely hear them even under a desk. Moving on to the motherboard in this build, and this is sort of the component that links everything else together. This is MSI's B450M Pro M2. Now, I probably sound like a broken record. This has to be the best budget AMD motherboard on the market. From a little bit of overclocking headroom to an M.2 slot on board, enough room for loads of storage drives, as well as a PCI-E 3.0 x16 slot to give our graphics card the maximum amount of bandwidth and throughput and data to and from our PC. It ticks all the boxes nicely. Furthermore, the micro ATX form factor provides a nice middle ground. It's not massive and feature rich and really expensive, and equally it's not tiny and charging you a price premium for that size uniqueness, shall we say. Moving on to the final part that we're going to be popping onto our motherboard before we then move that into the case, and this is a 16GB kit of Corsair's Vengeance LPX in a 2666 MHz speed. And breathe. Now, 16GB of RAM, if you can afford it, is definitely the way to go in 2019. Otherwise, we're going to end up bottlenecking our CPU or graphics card, meaning they'll be sitting there at 70 or 80% utilisation in some cases, just because we haven't got enough memory. Talking of price to performance and value, Seagate's 2TB Barracuda is the next component on today's list. Now, storage is always going to be a unique and interesting choice when it comes to your next gaming PC. A 2TB Seagate Barracuda is the slower hard drive format, but gives you 2000 gigs of space for all your movies, music, Steam, Origin libraries, all that good stuff, and means you're not going to run out in the near future. I would definitely recommend everyone, when they bump into a bit more cash or have some savings, grab something like this XPG SX8200 Pro. It's an M.2 SSD and slides straight into your motherboard. It's going to provide faster Windows boot up times, but isn't going to do an awful lot in the way of solid hard gaming performance, meaning if you're trying to get the best price to performance, an SSD just isn't the way to go in a build that costs less than $1,000. One component that definitely is the way to go though in a more budget build is NVIDIA's GTX 1660 graphics card. This particular model comes from GeekaWhat and is their more basic dual fan wind force cooler with 6GB of GDDR5 memory. NVIDIA have been on a roll recently, releasing the RTX 2080 Ti, the 2080, the 2070 and the 2060, and now they've come along with the 1660 and 1660 Ti. And yes, I know, it's bloody confusing. This essentially is the successor to the 1050 Ti/1060, if that makes sense, and it's going to give you some fantastic price to performance numbers. 1080p gaming, it is right at home, and 1440p gaming, if you're prepared to sacrifice a couple of settings, is definitely more than possible. You don't of course get the ray tracing performance found on those top end RTX graphics cards, but you're going to get plenty of performance for the latest AAA titles, most of which don't even support ray tracing or DLSS anyway. Moving on to the final component for today's build, hasn't time just flown by? This is the Cooler Master MasterWatt 550. Now, this deviates a little bit from the usual cheap and cheerful thermal tape power supplies I opt for in my more budget oriented builds, but once again it's all about balance. With black cables that aren't the horrible ketchup and mustard affair, the power supply looks a whole load better, and the semi-modular interface means you only plug in the cables you need. That helps to keep your cable management super easy and cable clutter to a minimum. Furthermore, you've got an 80+ bronze certification, meaning this power supply is rated to perform efficiently by a universally sort of accepted external company that do tests on a load of power supplies. If you aren't going to opt for this Cooler Master unit, fine, but try and get something 500-600 watt region with an 80+ certification. I cannot stress that enough. Your power supply, technically, I don't want to scare you, has the capability to wipe out your whole system. Yes, the whole thing. So buy properly first time rather than buying everything twice. Right then, so now seems like a good time to launch some games and have a bit of a play around and see just how powerful this machine is. First and foremost, I've booted up Apex Legends. Is of course one of the biggest games of the past few weeks, has risen very quickly to popularity, much like Fortnite and PUBG have both done. Now, genuinely, I haven't really played any of this game, especially compared to some of the hours I've put in on PUBG or Fortnite. But graphically, it looks a little bit more engaging, I'll be honest with you. I was never a massive fan of the graphics in PUBG, to be completely honest. I thought they were just a little bit dated. Oh, that's a wall. Oh, God. Right. Gun. That's the door. We have a gun. We are officially ready to go. Well, I mean, not ready, but, you know, it's better than having nothing in there. All right. Now, as you can see from the frame rate in the top right corner, this game is running really nicely indeed. I've currently got it on 1080p here, as you can see, with most of the other stuff bumped up to high, or very high for that matter, and that was achieving us around 100 and something frames per second. Now, moving on to the next game, this one is of course GTA 5, a bit more in my comfort zone, I must admit. I've grabbed a controller today because in the last PC build, which you can catch in the card section here, I tried playing solely with a keyboard and mouse, and you can see how that went. I don't know how you tilt up. How do you tilt up in a like a, what do you call it? Oh God, oh, that's gone terrible. It's all over. Oh God, only I could do that. Oh God, no, I don't think you, no. That's one of the really convenient thing about Windows. You can plug in an Xbox controller with a micro USB cable or pick up a wireless adapter, and I'll link those in the description below as well. Talking of peripherals, I've got a SK650. It's a low profile mechanical keyboard from Cooler Master that looks really good and has a USB-C connection on, alongside their budget CM310 mouse, which is really good for like $20-ish, alongside an extended RGB mouse pad to kind of finalise the trio. Now, in terms of the visual graphics settings I've selected, I've gone for 1440p. It's listed as 30Hz, but it's going to ignore that anyway, so don't worry. ×4 for MSAA, with everything else on normal to medium settings to give it a little bit of a chance at 1440p. So let's pop into story mode and see exactly what this machine can do. Now, as you can see here, the game is actually running pretty well at 1440p. We're seeing well over 60 frames per second. I mean, over 70 FPS now as well, with that FPS counter in the top right-hand corner of your screen. We could probably get away with a bit higher visual clarity and higher visual settings at 1440p, while still hitting 60 FPS most of the time. And this game is so much better with a controller, trust me. Now, as you can see here, with the resolution down to 1080p and those visual quality settings cranked up by quite some margin, we're perhaps getting a more immersive image retaining 60 FPS consistently, even if it is a little bit sharp. So there's an argument to be made: do you want a bit more render distance and some better textures, or do you want that higher resolution? Either way, you can sustain solid frame rates on either with this machine, which is always a big bonus. This machine is of course capable of all the esportsy style titles, so your Fortnite, your CSGO, World of Warcraft and League of Legends, perhaps slightly easier to run games but nevertheless still incredibly popular, as well as working well for something like Forza Horizon 4, the Just Cause series and crucially Overwatch, as you can see from the FPS figures on your screen now. But that, I think, just about wraps it up for today's video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Give it a big old like rating and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and ding dong that notification bell. As always though, enjoy that end outro montage and we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.
That's what happens when